Hi, I'm Rowenna. At my brother-in-law's promotion ceremony, I wasn't just left off the list. I was erased. No mistake, no oversight. Just silence served in polished glasses while they toasted a version of history I wasn't in. My name? Cropped out. My face? Replaced. My service? Rewritten under someone else's uniform. And when I stood outside, watching through glass like a ghost, the commander called out, "Hi, Major General." Why did that one sentence shake the room more than an explosion ever could? And what kind of family needs a stranger's voice to remember their own? Sometimes, the deepest silences don't come from the battlefield. They echo across dinner tables, family gatherings, in the way people look through you instead of at you. That kind of silence? It doesn't wear camouflage or carry rifles. It wears pearls, smiles too wide, and speaks in the language of polite exclusion. The phone rang on a Wednesday morning while I was reading the morning brief at the base. I recognized the number before I picked it up. My mother, Delora Easton. The voice on the other end was soft, sugar-coated like always. "Sweetheart," she said, stretching the word as though it were a favor. "Just a reminder. Garrett's promotion ceremony is coming up. You probably got the details." I hadn't. She continued, not skipping a beat. "It's going to be a lovely event. Press, dignitaries, military brass. You know how it is. It's his day. So maybe just let it be his. Don't feel obligated to attend if it'll create, a distraction." A distraction. That's what she called me now. Not her daughter. Not Major General Rowenna Easton. Just something that might make things inconvenient. I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself. I just ended the call with a clipped, "Understood." When your own mother tells you to disappear gracefully, you don't protest. You just note the wound and how it never really closed. The next day, a white envelope arrived by courier. Thick cardstock, formal. No handwriting, no warm note. Just an embossed seal and a computer-generated line. "You are cordially invited to the promotion ceremony of Captain Garrett Lorne." My sister Isolde didn't call, didn't email. She had it delivered like I was an administrative necessity, the kind of guest you send out of obligation. The font on the invite, bold, uniform, lacked personality, just like everything she curated in her perfect world. This wasn't an invitation, it was a performance checklist. One more thing for optics. I placed the envelope down, let it sit on the counter for 3 days, walked past it every morning like it was an unwanted guest in my own home. The logical part of me knew I should toss it, but something in me resisted. The last family event I'd attended was 2 years ago. Christmas. I'd driven down from D.C. after a deployment debrief in full uniform. They sat me at the end of the table, next to the coat rack, as if even then I was only half welcome. They toasted to Garrett's recent panel feature in some military magazine. No one asked about my field operation that saved 12 lives. Still, I couldn't throw the invite away. Not because I needed to be seen, but because I needed to remind them I hadn't vanished. So I opened the closet, pulled out my uniform, pressed it, polished every bar, every ribbon, tied my hair back the way I always did before a mission. If I was going, I wasn't showing up as their afterthought. I was walking in as Major General Easton, earned, not inherited. 2 weeks later, I arrived at the Jefferson Grand Hall 15 minutes early. It was a massive venue, too shiny for my taste. Polished marble floors, American flags on every corner, people with too much gel in their hair, and smiles too fixed on their faces. I approached the check-in table. The officer manning the list was young, maybe late 20s. He glanced at me, then at his clipboard. His brow furrowed. "Name?" he asked. "Rowenna Easton." He scanned the list again, then again. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You're not on the guest list." I didn't blink. Just reached into my blazer and pulled out the invitation. He scanned the code. "This code's not valid," he said, stepping back like I might make a scene. "I'll have to ask you to wait outside." I stepped aside without argument. My fingers curled around the edge of the envelope, now crumpled from being in my pocket too long. It wasn't an oversight. It was a message, a line in the sand drawn by family who wanted to curate the image, not confront the truth. Through the glass doors, I could see them. Isolde was adjusting Garrett's tie. My mother laughed at something someone said. No one noticed me. I turned, heart pounding, not from hurt, but clarity. I wasn't forgotten. I was deliberately uninvited. And just as I turned to leave, a voice cut through the air like a knife. "Hi, Major General." The wind was polite, almost rehearsed, like the kind you feel before a funeral. It swept over the marble facade of the Jefferson Grand Hall and flattened the corners of my dress uniform as I stood still, frozen not by fear, but by decision. This wasn't a battlefield, no protocols, no briefings, just a gate that didn't open, and people pretending not to see you. Behind the thick pane of glass, the sound of clinking glasses and indistinct laughter drifted through. The world inside was buzzing, clean, polished, curated. A place where people were measured not by scars or silence, but by how well they fit into someone else's idea of legacy. My boots felt heavier than usual. Funny how a pair of standard-issue combat soles could feel like anchors when the enemy wasn't shooting at you, but smiling from behind a name tag. I didn't expect anyone to come rushing out. But I didn't expect what happened next either. A woman in a navy cocktail dress, likely one of the senator's wives or someone important adjacent, walked briskly toward me. She barely glanced up. "Excuse me," she said. "Could you point me to the ladies' room?" I blinked. She tilted her head, annoyed. "Are you with the event staff?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. I just stared. Her face shifted from confusion to dismissal, and with a shrug, she walked off without waiting. I stood there, still a statue in a perfectly pressed uniform, with ribbons on the chest that apparently said nothing to her. You polish your medals for years, and one stranger turns you into a coat-check girl. I shifted my stance, instinctively checking the seams of my jacket. A distraction. I needed to reset, to not let this moment define the next. But just as I turned toward the glass again, something else caught my eye. A young staffer wheeled out a placard stand, a large foam board with a printed seating chart. The kind that lists names under categories: VIP, family, honorees, and support. Under logistics support, in a smaller font, my name was there: Rowenna Easton. Support. I walked toward it, slow and measured, as if walking any faster would make it more real. My name wasn't with the officers or dignitaries. It wasn't near Garrett or Isolde. It was buried under the names of audio techs and parking coordinators. "Excuse me," I said to a nearby junior officer in formal blues. He turned quickly. "Yes, ma'am," I pointed. "Who approved this?" He looked at the board, then at me, and smiled awkwardly. "Oh, that'd be Garrett Lorne's media team, I believe. They sent in the final list to printing." He said it like it was a weather report. Casual, informational. "I assumed you were part of the planning crew," he added. My jaw tightened. I wanted to speak, but what? Argue for my own title? Recite my deployments like I was begging for access to my own history? Instead, I nodded once and turned away. My hands found the edge of my collar, adjusting it even though it was already perfect. Military protocol said disengage when unwelcomed. Walk away with dignity. Don't draw fire you don't need. But this wasn't protocol. This was family. This was blood dressed up as strategy. You're not here for them. You're here to remind yourself they can't erase you quietly. And then, Isolde stepped outside. She was speaking to a vendor, clipboard in hand, her hair done in those waves she always said looked effortless. She scanned the area, eyes grazing over the crowd. Then her gaze hit me and passed through me. She didn't flinch, didn't falter, just adjusted her purse strap and walked by. 5 feet away. It wasn't avoidance. It was a decision, an intentional act. That was the real message, not the guest list, not the mislabel. The moment when your sister, who grew up 2 doors down from you, who used to braid your hair before school, looks through you like you're a stranger holding up the catering line. I watched her disappear back through the double doors, her heels clicking on the stone like punctuation marks on a sentence I didn't write. My throat was dry, but not from sadness, from recognition. I was never part of this narrative. I was a footnote they'd hoped would fade. I turned to leave, not in defeat, but calculation. This was no longer their stage, and I had no intention of being the silent character in their script. Then I heard it. A voice. Commanding, deliberate. Major General Easton, why are you outside? Major General Easton, why are you outside? The voice landed like a steel door swinging open. I turned slowly. There stood Colonel Denton, creased uniform, no nonsense, and eyes that had seen the same sandstorms I had back in Helmand. He looked like a man halfway between a question and a confrontation. Sir, I said, steady. His gaze narrowed just a bit. You're not inside. No, sir. He didn't press me for more. Instead, he looked through the glass doors behind me, the ones separating the curated inside from where I stood. Unlisted, misfiled, forgotten. I saw the program, he said quietly. Thought it was odd. You weren't on it. That was Denton's way of saying something's off without stepping on a landmine. My smile barely surfaced. Guess I didn't fit the narrative, he exhaled. This place sometimes celebrates fiction better than fact. We didn't say anything else. He nodded once, turned, and walked back inside. His silence louder than most people's speeches. I stayed where I was. That night, back at my apartment, I couldn't sleep. I poured myself some tea, turned off all the lights, and pulled up the online version of the program Denton had mentioned. I scrolled to the section titled Valor Initiative. Honorees. 20 names. Garrett's near the top. Mine wasn't there. Not even a mention under coordinators. No footnote, no asterisk, nothing. They didn't just exclude me. They revised the history I'd helped write. Erasing a name isn't like tearing a page. It's like rewriting the whole book, then pretending the original never existed. And it wasn't the first time. Earlier that same week, I had stopped by my family's house in Richmond. I hadn't planned to stay long, just long enough to return a service medal my father had kept on his wall, back when he used to hang pieces of me proudly. The stairwell had changed. Where my framed military portrait had once hung, taken the day I earned my first star, now stood a stretched canvas print of Isolde and Garrett's wedding photo. Big, golden lit, designer wrapped, their hands entwined, grins wide. It swallowed the entire wall. My mother, Delora, appeared behind me. She glanced at the canvas and smiled lightly. We needed more light in that hallway. The old photo just didn't match the new decor. That's what I had become. A lighting problem. I didn't argue. I didn't even ask where the photo went. I turned, thanked her for the tea I never touched, and left. Some erasures happen in paperwork. Others happen in plain sight. Inside homes that claim to know your middle name. Back in my apartment, I sat on the floor with a folder in front of me. News clippings, deployment photos, operation reports, copies of emails, a trail of breadcrumbs to remind myself I hadn't imagined any of it. You were the good daughter, I whispered to the silence, just not the worthy one. That thought stayed with me, like an old scar you no longer feel but can't stop tracing. They didn't clap for me, so I built my own stage. The phone buzzed, a message from Denton. No words, just a photo he'd taken of the printed program at the ceremony. He circled Garrett's name. That was enough. I didn't need a podium. I needed proof. The next morning, I pulled on a plain black coat. No pins, no medals. Just me. I headed back to the venue. Not for them, but for myself. I didn't go inside. I walked the perimeter, quiet, collected. At the side of the building, I found what I needed. Discarded programs bundled together, meant for recycling. I tore one open and flipped through it. Page 7. Key contributors to the Valor Initiative. There it was. Captain Garrett Lorne. Leadership. And next to his name was the title I'd once held first. I stared at that program booklet until the light from the street lamps turned silver on its glossy surface. My name wasn't missing. It was replaced. Garrett's title, Leadership Coordinator, Operation Valor, was printed where mine should have been. And next to it, a rank I'd held long before he ever wore a uniform. Back inside my car, I sat for a long while with the engine off, windows fogging slightly from my breath. I didn't need heat, I needed focus. 1 week ago, I received a message from an old systems tech I'd served with overseas. A quiet guy, loyal to a fault, but he never forgot where loyalty really belonged. He didn't say much, just forwarded an internal email that made my spine stiffen. The subject line read, "Suggested removal from visual comms. Final list." The email was from Garrett's campaign coordinator, copied to his old's personal account. "This version better aligns with optics," it said. "Her presence shifts focus." They hadn't forgotten me. They deleted me. And worse, they'd rehearsed how to make it look accidental. Inside the console, I pulled out my laptop. Even in darkness, my fingers knew every key, every folder. I began drafting a timeline, clean and clinical. Missions led, commendations received, operations authorized, and then names altered. Citations where my name was replaced with his. Photos where my image had been cropped. Archived files with subtle edits, all pointing toward a story being rewritten, one press release at a time. I paused mid-sentence. "When you're asked to stay silent for too long," I whispered to no one, "the truth starts sounding like revenge." It wasn't just about that evening. This went deeper, years deep. I thought back to Isolde's expression earlier, when she passed me by as if I were a misplaced coat. That wasn't surprise. That was strategy. Her eyes didn't flicker. Her jaw didn't tighten. She had practiced not seeing me. And that practice? It started long before Garrett ever stepped into our lives. I remembered the dinner from years ago, my first major promotion. I came home from my assignment, uniform starched, heart full. Dad poured the wine, and Mom made her dry pot roast. I'd barely sat down when Isolde interrupted to announce Garrett had received his commendation ribbon. The room cheered, toasts clinked, and someone muttered, "Looks like we have a real soldier in the family now." I said nothing then, just swallowed the memory. Now I refused to do the same. I picked up my phone and dialed a secure line I hadn't used in 5 years. A voice answered after 2 rings. "This is Trina." I didn't bother with pleasantries. "It's Rowenna Easton." There was a beat, then, "What do you need?" "Just one thing. If my name doesn't exist in tonight's ceremony, it'll exist on every screen tomorrow." I hung up before she could ask for context. "This ends on my terms." I turned back to the email chain on my screen, highlighting the timestamp, copying it to the master document. Evidence stacked neatly, silently, like rows of medals that no one ever asked about. As I worked, something pulled at me from the past. Isolde's words, always cutting in that diplomatic tone. "Garrett fits better with the military image. You know that, Ro. You're too intense." Intense was their favorite word when they didn't want to say inconvenient. I finished the file, compressed it, labeled the archive Easton Unedited, then attached it to 3 emails, one to the Department of Defense's Ethics Bureau, one to a contact at a small but credible investigative outlet, and one to myself. Before hitting send, I whispered, "You can win wars and still lose in your own living room." And then I clicked. A moment passed. I closed the laptop and placed it on the passenger seat. My hand was steady. I wasn't shaking, not anymore. The headlights from a valet cart rolled past, briefly illuminating the interior of my car. And in that moment, with digital proof logged and my silence officially broken, I understood something simple but seismic. I wasn't hiding anymore. I adjusted my collar, took one last breath through my nose, and walked toward the side corridor just past the ballroom entrance, where family members were lining up for group photos. The air smelled like too much cologne and manufactured joy. I didn't belong in that photo, and not because I didn't earn it. Rowenna, a small voice called out. I looked down and saw Mia, my niece, Isolde's daughter, standing in her party shoes, gripping a paper cup of fruit punch, like it was classified intel. Her eyes squinted at me, then darted toward the main screen inside the ballroom. Why didn't they put your name on the screen? You're the real soldier, right? Her innocence was like a blade, clean and unintentional. A few heads nearby turned. The chatter dimmed a notch. I crouched, met her gaze. Sometimes, I said softly, grown-ups forget who's really in the picture. Doesn't mean you're not there. She blinked, nodded slowly, like she almost got it, then ran off when someone called her name. I stood up and saw Isolde approaching, her steps measured, her smile strained like a stretched ribbon ready to snap. Didn't expect you'd still be here, she said. Her voice was syrup over gravel. I didn't flinch. Neither did you, I imagine. She folded her arms, eyes darting toward onlookers who were suddenly very interested in their drinks. Let's not do this here, she said. Then you shouldn't have done it anywhere. I pulled a printed program from my pocket, unfolded it like evidence. Captain Garrett Lorne, Valor Initiative Lead, I read aloud. Then, from under my arm, I drew a laminated news clipping, yellowed at the edges, dated 4 years ago. The photo was grainy but unmistakable. Me, flanked by 2 medics, radio in hand, sweat and blood on my collar. The headline read, Easton leads pre-dawn tactical strike, saves 9. Funny how history rewrites itself when convenient, I said, loud enough for the nearest 4 people to hear. The room seemed to still, as though it too was listening. Garrett appeared behind Isolde like a shadow that always showed up just late enough. Rowenna, he began, holding his palms up. This isn't the time. You already made the time, I said, not raising my voice. You just weren't expecting me to remember. Whispers passed between couples. Someone gasped when they saw the article. A retired general near the bar gave a slow, subtle nod without ever making eye contact with me. Garrett stepped forward. We can talk privately. No, you lost that option when you decided I was safer in the shadows. I turned toward my mother, who was watching with a tight jaw and a nervous grip on her wineglass. You used to call me the Shadow, remember? I said to her directly, not caring who heard. Well, guess what? You can't block out the sun with silence forever. Dolora's lips parted slightly, but nothing came out. I folded the clipping, slid it back into my jacket. I didn't come to be included, I continued. I came to remind you I'm not invisible. Garrett's eyes shifted. I could tell he was calculating next moves. Damage control, how fast this would hit donor inboxes. He turned to the event coordinator nearby. Can we get someone from security over here? But before anyone could step forward, a sharp buzzing rang through the air. The ballroom's main digital screen flickered, once, then twice, before it went black. Gasps rose like a tide. And when it reloaded, a name appeared that wasn't supposed to. The ballroom froze mid-breath. There, on the massive digital screen that moments ago displayed the Valor Initiative logo and Garrett's name in elegant serif, now shimmered the words, Madge, Jenner Rowenna Easton. Just below it, a single line. Valor Legacy, Silent Commanders. I didn't move, neither did they. I felt the room shift, not with noise, but with awareness, like the hush that falls before a verdict. I didn't plan for the screen. Someone, somewhere, made a decision that slipped past the PR firewall, and now every name left off the program stood blinking in bold. Garrett rushed forward, jaw clenched, whispering frantically to the AV tech crouched near the side booth. The man shook his head twice. Whatever had triggered the display, it wasn't coming down without a manual override. Don't bother, I said, stepping up slowly. I have the printed version, this one. I pulled out the logistics list, the same one from the welcome table, folded neatly, annotated. I held it up and addressed no one in particular, just loud enough for the ripple effect to begin. This document lists me as part of the support crew. A few people frowned. I flipped the page. Approved by Garrett Lorne's campaign liaison. I turned toward Garrett. You didn't forget me. You filed me, under support services. He didn't respond, but his ears flushed a deep, guilty red. A chair scraped loudly across the floor. Then footsteps. An older man, Colonel Barker, retired, silver star pinned to his breast pocket, stepped out from his seat and faced the crowd. I served under this woman in Kandahar, he said, voice clear and graveled with age. If this hall has room for valor, it better make space for truth. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. Murmurs spread. Not the polite, dismissive kind. This was rumble. I took another breath. I wasn't finished. A memory struck me. 2 nights earlier, standing in the hallway of our old family home, I had come to drop off a medal I no longer wanted displayed. As I passed the stairwell, I heard Isolde's voice carrying down from the landing above. She's too loud in presence, she said into her phone. We need this day to stay on message. No distractions. A pause. She's not family, she's a distraction. The words landed again now, sharper under the ballroom lights. I turned back to the room. I was never meant to be invisible, I said. They just hoped I'd keep quiet. Garrett shifted uncomfortably. Isolde stiffened. Her hands clenched tightly at her sides. I kept going. Here's the thing about silence. It either buries you or builds you. Tonight, I chose. No one interrupted. Some looked away. Others stared. One woman bit her lip so hard she left a red mark on the edge of her wineglass. Then I felt someone approach from the left. A young officer, maybe 30, eyes wide, posture uncertain. I honestly thought you were someone's assistant, he said, breath catching halfway through. I'm sorry. I tilted my head. Don't be. You only saw what they showed you. He nodded, stepped back, then stood straighter than he had all evening. And then, a sound I hadn't heard in years. Not for me, not like this. One pair of hands clapped, then another. Not thunderous, not rehearsed, but honest. I didn't smile, I didn't bow. I just stood there, steady, because applause wasn't the victory. The silence that followed? That was. The applause died almost as quickly as it started, but the silence it left behind was different this time. Thicker, tighter, like air just before a downpour. I didn't move. I scanned the room, not to measure approval, but to read the faces of people who'd once smiled at me like family. Some looked away. Others looked through me. But a few were just beginning to see. The stillness was broken by a familiar stride. Lana Haynes. We'd shared recon rotations in hostile terrain, where a breath out of sync could mean the end. Back then, she once told me, if I ever see you treated wrong, I'll speak up, always. She walked right up to me now, and didn't say a word. She met my eyes, nodded slightly, then walked past. That nod, it wasn't respect, it was resignation. It said, I know what's happening, and I can't afford to stand next to you right now. Sometimes silence doesn't mean agreement, it means survival. I understood, I really did. But it still landed like a cold draft down the back of my neck. Across the room, Garrett was leaning into a press photographer, whispering with too much urgency for someone trying to look composed. I moved closer. Just shoot the stage, all right? He muttered. Avoid the floor shots, crowd's not relevant. I smiled without showing teeth. You're better at photo ops than actual missions, Garrett. His head jerked toward me. Excuse me? I didn't blink. You heard me. At least I know how to work with people, he snapped. A small gasp floated out of the group near the refreshment table. I heard someone mutter, did he just say that? I reached into my handbag and pulled out a tablet, already queued up with side-by-side images. Since you're fond of visuals, I said, tapping the screen, here's a good one. The slideshow began. On the left, a still from Operation Meridian, our joint mission. I was front and center, directing fire support, radio to my ear, medics flanking me. On the right, the same image, but edited, cropped. A male soldier superimposed over my frame, face blurred slightly, but the uniform bore Garrett's insignia. It had been uploaded to his campaign site just 2 months ago. "You didn't just steal valor," I said evenly. "You redrew the battlefield." His jaw clenched. Isolde moved closer, her expression blank as a press release. The room buzzed in half whispers. I stepped back, giving the screen room to breathe. "Truth doesn't yell," I said. "It just waits, until the room's quiet enough to be heard." No one moved. Then I heard it. A whisper from behind me. "She's been holding this in for years." It was almost reverent. Then, more voices began to rise in waves. "I remember the story differently," said a woman in a navy shawl. "Wasn't she the one who called the last evac chopper?" asked a man with a name badge that read, "Veterans for Accountability." Another woman added, "PR said Garrett led it. That's what they briefed." And just like that, the whispers began to unravel the myth. I stood still in the center of it, not triumphant, just steady. Garrett's face tightened. He turned to a security aide near the back and made a subtle hand gesture. Two men in dark suits began making their way toward me. This time, I didn't flinch, and as they approached, I reached into my blazer. Not for defense, but for documentation. I moved slowly, deliberately, reaching into my blazer as the security team closed the distance. Their eyes scanned for threat. What they got was truth. From inside my jacket, I pulled a thick folder, navy blue, military grade, zipped at the seams. I laid it calmly on the check-in podium, next to a tray of untouched name badges and a vase of wilting roses. "This is what you missed," I said. I unzipped it and opened it like a surgeon exposing a beating heart. Inside, printed emails, mission orders, satellite data, photos. Each document had been marked, time-stamped, authenticated. I lifted the top page, a deployment confirmation signed by a lieutenant general. Underneath it, an official comms log from Operation Meridian with my name, my clearance code, my field authority. A photo came next. Not posed, not cropped. Just me, mid-command, with dirt in my teeth and blood on my sleeve, leading a team out of a hot zone. Time-stamped, metadata intact. "You erased me from this program," I said quietly, not looking at Garrett or Isolde. "But you can't erase a military archive." Gasps rippled from the front row. Someone dropped their glass. I reached for 3 manila envelopes and placed them one by one on the podium. "These are certified copies of a letter I submitted to the Office of Military Ethics last week." The coordinator beside me flinched. "This isn't revenge," I continued, locking eyes with Garrett. "It's audit." He stepped forward, palms splayed. "You're making a scene." I turned to him fully. "No, Garrett. You made it when you looked past me and greeted the man behind me like I didn't exist." He opened his mouth to argue, but I didn't let him speak. "You lied about what I did. You took my rank. You rewrote the entire record so you could play hero in front of your donors." A new wave of murmurs rippled across the room. "She has documents? She's Major General Easton? I thought she left the service." I turned slowly and faced the audience, voice even. "Why wasn't I listed? Why was I demoted on paper and buried under logistics support?" No one answered. Not one hand was raised. Then a girl stood, barely 20 in cadet blues, her cheeks flushed but her spine straight. "Ma'am," she said, "I know who you are." She stepped forward. Her voice didn't shake. "I joined because of you." And then she saluted, in front of everyone. The room froze. I didn't smile. I nodded, slowly, purposefully. The weight of that moment wasn't in the gesture. It was in everything behind it. All the silences, the erasures, the convenient forgetting, undone by a single honest act. And then, from behind the curtain at the far end of the stage, a voice cut through the stillness. "That will be enough." Commander Jensen stepped into view, posture erect, eyes sharp with restrained fury. And when he said my name next, no one dared look away. Major General Rowenna Easton, please step forward. Commander Jensen's voice rang clear, cutting through the remaining whispers like a scalpel through old bandages. Every head in the room turned, some in confusion, some in dread, a few with guilt barely masked behind politeness. I didn't hesitate. I moved through the sea of tuxedos and medals, their wearers parting as if I carried fire. I didn't smile. I didn't falter. I simply walked up the steps toward the podium where Commander Jensen stood waiting, expression unreadable but sharp. He didn't look at Garrett, didn't glance at Isolde. His focus stayed on me. When history gets edited for convenience, he said into the microphone, it becomes fiction. Tonight, we correct that. A slow ripple moved through the crowd. Major General Easton's service record is not only impeccable, he continued, but essential to every success referenced in this evening's ceremony. We honor the ones who speak through action, not applause. He turned slightly toward me. This recognition is long overdue. Some clapped. Not all, but enough to make people shift uncomfortably in their chairs. Then came the correction. In the official operation dossier of Meridian Strike, Jensen said, pulling a page from a folder, Major General Easton is listed as the strategic lead. Any reference otherwise is not only inaccurate, it's misleading. My gaze flicked toward Garrett. His face didn't move. Not even a twitch. But his campaign handler, some Ivy League PR consultant with perfect posture, quietly stood, collected her tablet, and slipped out the side door, without so much as a glance backward. That was enough. In the crowd, I spotted Isolde standing at the edge, half hidden by a marble column. Her arms were crossed, but her expression had cracked. No more tight smiles or diplomatic half-nods, just raw exposure. Our eyes met. I didn't glare, I didn't challenge. I nodded, and for the first time since we were kids, she looked away. She turned and walked out of the hall. It was quieter now. As I stepped down from the stage, a couple, old family friends, the Larrisons, approached. We didn't know, Mrs. Larrison said, voice small. Mr. Larrison handed me a folded copy of the evening's program. The page with Garrett's name was torn in half. You deserved better, he said. Another guest leaned in as I passed. About damn time. I didn't thank them. Not because I wasn't grateful, but because this wasn't about gratitude. It was about truth reclaiming its own weight. Near the back, I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Sergeant Mathis, retired now, but once one of my field operators. He leaned in. They didn't block you because you failed, he said quietly. They blocked you because you made too many of them look unworthy by comparison. I looked him in the eye. Then let them keep fearing. He smiled, shook my hand, and faded back into the room. I returned to my seat near the far wall. My hands were steady, but my heart had shifted. Lighter somehow, not because I'd won, but because I'd stopped caring what they refused to acknowledge. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stepped into the corner and answered, low. Ms. Easton, this is from the Inspector General's office. We've reviewed your documents. We need to talk. The call ended just as quietly as it began. The voice on the other end had been calm, measured. Not the tone of a reprimand, but the cadence of someone laying out a next step. I sat in my kitchen, the morning light slanting across a cup of tea I hadn't touched. The steam had faded, but the words lingered. We need to talk. By noon, I was in a federal building downtown, sitting across from two officers in uniform crisp enough to slice paper. One wore the kind of pin that said he'd seen too many things to believe anything at face value. The other had a folder marked with my name, but his eyes were on me, not the file. This doesn't look like a clerical error, he said, flipping a page. This looks like a directive. They asked questions. I answered. When I showed them the email headers and metadata logs, the room got quieter. I watched the younger officer's pen pause mid-sentence. It was orchestrated, I said. Not an accident, not a lapse, An edit. They didn't argue. That evening, my inbox chimed again, this time from a local news outlet. A short message. We received your file through an anonymous tip. Can we verify it with you on record? I didn't respond with an interview. I replied with a single sentence. Truth doesn't need a microphone, just a receipt. Within hours, footage from the ceremony hit the forums. The clip of Commander Jensen's voice, steady, unflinching, saying Major General Rowenna Easton, had been cut and shared 1,000 times. Someone paired it with a split screen of Garrett receiving accolades. The comparison was ruthless. A new nickname began to trend: the Quiet Rank. Commenters picked apart Garrett's past events, interviews, briefings, photos now under scrutiny for who had been cropped out or conveniently untagged. And me? I didn't post a thing, didn't comment. I watched, in silence, as the record I never asked to rewrite began rewriting itself, correctly this time. Later that night, I walked past the Jefferson Grand Hall again. I stood near the same entrance where, just days ago, I had been told I wasn't on the list. Back then, it had felt like exile, like they were locking a door behind me and daring me to knock. Now I understood. It had been their last defense, a locked gate to keep the truth from getting in. And it failed. Meanwhile, Garrett's campaign went quiet. His press secretary took an indefinite leave. Donors withdrew public endorsements. Then came the formal announcement: a federal audit into commendation manipulation, misuse of classified visuals, internal corruption wrapped in press releases. Isolde issued a statement the next day. We regret any administrative confusion caused during the recent ceremony. I read it on my phone over coffee. Confusion, I muttered aloud, has names. Mine was one. I didn't need her apology. I didn't want it. What I wanted came 2 days later, delivered not in an envelope, but in an invitation. A seat on the National Veterans Policy Leadership Panel, not as Garrett's sister-in-law, not as a side note to someone else's narrative, as Major General Easton. There was no caveat, no hint of tokenism, just a line at the bottom that read, Your voice matters. We want it in the room. And for the first time, I said yes to a table that didn't ask me to shrink to fit. The envelope sat open on my kitchen counter, next to a half-drunk cup of coffee and the morning sunlight pooling through the blinds. Inside it was the formal confirmation: my seat on the National Veterans Policy Leadership Panel. It wasn't a gesture. It was a responsibility. And for once, it didn't come with someone else's name in bold at the top. I stared at it in silence, running my fingers along the embossed edges. It felt heavier than it should, not in weight, but in meaning. Then the phone rang. Delora Easton, the screen read. I stared at the name longer than I needed to. 2 rings, then 3. I picked up. We didn't expect it to go that way, my mother's voice said, soft as ever, like she was trying not to disturb a room I wasn't in. No, I replied, steady. You didn't expect me to stay standing. She sighed. One of those sighs that tried to carry the weight of an apology without ever using the words. We never meant to hurt you, she offered, but we had to support your sister's family. I let that settle. And who was supposed to support me? There was a pause. An ache, maybe, but no answer. My thoughts wandered back to her voice days before the ceremony. The call where she told me, gently, that maybe it was best if I didn't attend. That it was Garrett's day, and I should let it be his. Back then, those words had stung like betrayal. Now I saw them clearly, not as cruelty, but cowardice dressed as courtesy. It wasn't that she didn't love me. She just didn't want to challenge the comfort she'd spent years curating. That afternoon, I drove back to Richmond. The house looked the same, brick, ivy-lined, proud. I let myself in with the spare key they hadn't changed. I walked through the halls like someone visiting a museum that used to be their own story. The photo of Garrett and Isolde still hung in the stairwell. My portrait had never returned. no frame, no replacement. But something had shifted. I didn't feel erased anymore, just unneeded. And for the first time, that didn't hurt. I left a small envelope on the hall table. Inside was a printout of the commendation letter, signed, dated, stamped. No note, no message. I didn't need to explain what had already been documented. Back home, I reviewed a report someone had emailed me from the archives. There, in black and white, was my name, once listed under logistics support at Garrett's event. It still made me shake my head. Funny how they needed my labor, I whispered, but not my legacy. I turned to my desk and signed the latest draft policy memo for the Veterans Board. At the top of the document, my title read, Strategic Consultant, National Veteran Policy Leadership. Not captain, not support, not someone's sister-in-law, Major General Rowenna Easton. That night, I poured a drink, just one, and sat on the back porch. My phone buzzed again. A message. Not from a stranger this time, from Isolde. It read, We need to talk. No press. Just us. I stared at the screen. And for the first time in years, I didn't delete her message. I listened to Isolde's voicemail twice before I said a word. Her voice didn't crack, but it didn't command either. There was something bruised in it. An ache that only shows up when your carefully constructed narrative starts to fold in on itself. No press, she'd said. Just us. I agreed. 2 weeks later, I stood on a different kind of stage. This one had a press banner behind it, rows of military flags on either side, and a crowd that didn't avoid eye contact when I stepped up. I wore my dress blues, not because I had to, but because I earned them. The general at the podium spoke my name without hesitation. Major General Rowenna Easton. A murmur rose from the audience. Cameras clicked. She stands here today not as a correction, he continued, but as an institutional acknowledgement of what was always true. When history fell silent, she didn't. And when he handed me the plaque, solid oak and steel engraved with my name, and the operation code they once scrubbed out of every report, the room rose. All of them. I didn't cry. That wasn't what this was. It wasn't redemption. It was restoration. It took them years to erase me, I said quietly to the mic. It took one page to write me back in. After the press cleared and handshakes faded, I headed toward a small cafe tucked in the corner of Old Town Alexandria. No reporters, no security. Just me and a window seat where Isolde already waited, stirring a tea she hadn't touched. She looked up as I approached, lips tight. She didn't speak first. I did. I'm not here to reconcile, I said, sliding into the seat across from her. I'm here to return what you tried to take. I placed a small black flash drive on the table and slid it forward. Across its surface, a silver label read, For legal records. She stared at it, blinking slowly. What's on that? Everything, I answered. Emails, edits, the digital paper trail. It's not a threat. It's a ledger. You didn't stop it, I said, firm but calm. You let them shape me out of the picture because it was easier. For him, for you, for the story. Her fingers curled slightly, pulling away from the drive like it might burn her. You can keep the wedding photos, I added. I kept the battlefield. No tears, no raised voices, just truth sitting between us, dense as concrete. I left before she could decide what to say. Later that week, I spoke at the Officer Training Academy. The new recruits sat taller when I stepped onto the platform. Not because they knew me, but because they'd seen the footage. They'd read the headlines. No one, I told them, gets to define you by their convenience. I paced, paused, met their eyes. If they don't offer you a seat, build your own table, but build it strong enough to carry others when it's their turn. After the applause, a familiar figure waited by the back doors. Thalia. Her uniform was sharper now, her voice more confident. We've got new intake next quarter, she said. We want you to help lead the mentorship program. I smiled. Only if we stop echoing, I told her. No copy-paste leadership. Original voices only. She nodded, eyes shining. That evening, I drove back to Richmond alone. Pulled up to the family home. Lights were on, but I didn't knock. Instead, I stepped onto the porch, pulled a small item from my coat pocket, and pinned it to the inside of the wooden doorframe. My nameplate, simple, clean, military issue. I didn't need them to see it, but I wanted it there. I stepped back, looked at the house one last time, and walked away. Voiceover narration came easily in my head, something I once wrote to myself in a quiet room after being told I wasn't invited. They wrote me out of the story once. So I wrote a better one. Not everyone who walks away is lost. Some of us walk because we finally found where we're going,